to Dorothy, and my thanks to Loredana and Christine as well. Well, I'll go straight into the topic without very much introduction. I will be talking on translation performativity. I will be looking at adaptation studies, adaptation and translating studies, then performance studies. I think I have quite a lot of material, so I think I'll have to go very fast. The slides are with Dorota, so there's no need for you to. Nobody takes notes, everybody photographs things. Okay. All right. Well, I'm very pleased to come again to Cardiff because I first got in contact with the adaptation studies, the conference I was talking at on adaptation studies in Cardiff at the conference centre organised by Glamorgan University some 6-7 years ago. And that was my first contact with adaptation studies per se. Working in translation studies for the last 20-25 years, I had been very familiar with many theories on adaptation, but always through translation studies. When I got in contact with this particular conference and was speaking there, I began to realize that there's a whole different discipline, a whole different area called adaptation studies. And like Monsieur Jourdain in Molière's Le Bourgeois Gentilhomme, I said, I have been working in this for the last 20 years. And then I realized, finally the realization came to me, it's something I'd been doing without knowing for a very long time. Well, the crossover goes right back to Dryden. I think most of you here are from the area of translation studies, yeah? So the names here, André Lefebvre's Refraction, Rewriting, should be familiar to you all. Yeah, it should be familiar to you all. As should Eugene Neider's Dynamic Functionalism, as should the work by Maria Timoshko, particularly her classic book, Translation in a Post-Colonial Context, where she looks at the rewritings, the refractions, the translations of the legends of Cardiff. So it's an area which has considerable pedigree, considerable history in translation studies. Let's look at some of the constraints which bring us to adaptations. The target audience, adaptations for children, backgrounds, people with disabilities. Commercial factors, you probably know André Lefebvre's well-known article, Mother Courageous Cucumbers, in which he talks about the fact that the songs in Broadway productions of Mother Courage had to be curtailed because it would mean employing a larger number, a bigger orchestra, and the cost would be excessive. Political elements, I've already mentioned Maria Timoshko's Cahalan and the various political translations which were made before the independence of Ireland, the turn of the 18th, 19th century. Annie Brisset's work on political translations in Quebec is quite well known. Michel Garneau's adaptation of Macbeth, in which the phrase au pauvre pays, a poor country, is repeated a number of times. The audience would make the association au poor country with poor Quebec, dominated by English Canada, by the US. I've done quite a lot of work on a Brazilian book club, the Clube do Livro, in which for commercial reasons, for moral reasons, sexual, scatological, political elements were cut. Language pairs, working between unfamiliar languages, will mean a number of different elements will have to be changed. And of course, we all know the Belle ou Fidèle, the French translations of the 17th and 18th century, in which a large number of factors which were displeasing to French good taste had to be changed. Types of adapted translation. Very quickly again, because I want to go on. Localization of websites, children literature, theatre text. I believe David Johnson talked about theatrical adaptation last week. Advertising, texts, My friend and colleague in Brazil, Vila Lúcia Santiago, has done work on translation of captions for the hard of hearing and also audio description for the blind. Songs, both opera and popular, are adapted. I have my work on the Club de Livre, translation for mass markets of classical works. And of course, there's an enormous amount of adaptation of religious works. I mentioned Eugene Nida, but if you go on the internet, you'll find an enormous amount of Bible stories directed towards children from a wide range of religions. Well, moving from what I call adaptation studies and translation studies to adaptation studies, we find a rather different field, which is usually intersemiotic and intralingual within the same language. The standard study is book to film, book to opera, book to play, or maybe book to film to opera to play, a chain of adaptations, or possibly book to book. We find an enormous number of adaptations and appropriations of Shakespeare and the other greats. We find adaptation studies, not in our departments, which I don't know this department at all, but it's, of course, we're in the School of Modern Languages, aren't we? Yeah. Sorry. We're in modern languages. Sorry, yes. Modern languages. We find departments of adaptation, and they do exist. I think the first one in the UK is at De Montfort University in Leicester. You can get a degree in adaptation studies. But departments of adaptation studies and people working in adaptation studies are found not so much in modern language departments, much more in departments of film and media studies, maybe music studies, cultural studies, maybe English literature. And the studies I have looked at have been dominated by screen adaptations. If you look at the journal JAP, Journal of Adaptation of Film and Performance, and particularly adaptation, you will find the great majority of studies linked to intralingual, intersemiotic film or screen adaptations. Katja Krebs, who I think a number of people here know, is one of the editors of JAP. They encourage people working in the area of translation to publish. However, the great majority of articles they receive are screen translation. Let's look at I think the back cover of adaptation. Adaptation is an international peer-reviewed journal offering academic articles, film and book reviews, including both book-to-screen adaptation, screen-to-book adaptation, popular and classic adaptations, theatre and novel screen adaptations, television animation soundtracks, production issues, and genre literature on screen. Adaptation provides an international forum to theorize and interrogate the phenomenon of literature on screen, both from a literary and film studies perspective. It's very clear the approach which adaptation takes. We can very quickly look at an issue in which, let's just look at the titles: foregrounding in the media, atonement as adaptation, adapting lesbian, Mary Magenti, and the practice of lesbian screenwriting, sussing why the diving bell and the butterfly's autobiographical text, an object of interest observing Elizabeth and Andrew Davies' Pride and Prejudice, what becomes of things on film, adaptation in Owen Land. Thomas Leach, regarded as one of the foremost authors in the area of adaptation studies, in his essay, the state-of-the-art essay, Adaptation of the Genre, he said, considering film and television adaptations in the context of the source text they're adapting, this essay proposes another context for the reception and analysis, the genre of adaptation itself, focusing on the Hollywood traditions of masculine adventure and feminine romance associated respectively with adaptations of Alexandre Dumas, Père et Fils, It identifies 4 genre markers come from traditions that make it more likely given adaptation would be perceived as an adaptation even by an audience that does not know its source. This is the younger boomer, but not the older. This essay concludes by proposing adaptation as a model for all Hollywood genre. Okay, one would think, coming from translation area, that he might work with translations from French versions, adapting the novels. Not at all. Just let's make a very basic word count. How many times does he mention the word translation? 0. He mentions French film, French emperor, French women, French film. I think he mentions them each once. French language, not at all. French language itself, 0. Screen, 15 times. Hollywood, 13 times. I think it's very clear to see where the influence of the article comes from. Well, what I've tried to show then is that the areas of adaptation studies and adaptation and translation studies are very different areas. When I began dabbling a little bit in the area of adaptation studies, I thought, oh, let's bring them together. Let's do things together. However, this is much easier said than done. It seems that most people working in adaptation studies are working area of film studies, screen, influence of Hollywood, etc. They have their own publications, their own conferences, their own readings, and do not work in the area of translation studies. Indeed, many are monolingual. Let's move on a little bit here to the second part of the talk, performance studies. Many of you, some of you, I mean, this is a kind of basic handbook, one of the many Rutledge, is it Rutledge or long way? Rutledge handbooks, performance studies, to give an idea of the area. What I'm going to do is just mention very briefly the authors here, and then concentrate on the work of Irving Goffman. Richard Schechner, who's written widely on performativity and performance studies, sees performance as a key element of politics, medicine, religion, popular entertainment, and daily life. Working at New York University Performance Studies Department, he believes and has tried to make drama and performance university departments more all-inclusive to deal with aspects of performance which are related to everyday life. As I mentioned here, politics, medicine, religion, popular entertainment, not only theatre. A number of you will be familiar with the linguist Austin, working with language performance, as you will be familiar with John Searle's speech acts. And Judith Butler is widely read nowadays as one of the foremost critics, gender critics. We play, or we do, or we perform sex or gender. Quoting Simone Beauvoir, woman is a historical idea and not a natural fact. Gender is what is put on, invariably under constraint, daily and incessantly, with anxiety and pleasure. But is this continuous act mistaken for a natural or linguistic given? Sorry, there's a mistake here. But in this continuous act, no, sorry, there's a mistake. It's wrong, isn't it? But this continuous act, let's try this. But this continuous act is mistaken for a natural or linguistic given. Power is relinquished to expand the cultural field bodily through subversive performatives of different kinds. So sexuality, gender, is very much performance. I would like to concentrate now on Irving Goffman's presentation of the self in everyday life. American sociologist, published this work in 1959, apparently very well known at the time, rather less known nowadays. Goffman sees performativity as an element which we all deal with every day. Our whole life is performance. All social contact takes in elements of performance. I mean this report to serve as a sort of handbook detailing one sociological perspective from which social life can be studied, especially the kind of social life that is organized within the physical confines of a building or plant. The perspective employed is that of the theoretical performance. The principles derived are dramaturgical ones. I shall consider the way in which the individual presents himself and his activity to others, the way in which he guides and controls the impression they form of him, and the kinds of things he may and may not do while sustaining his poor performance before them. All of social action contains the element of performance. Performance may be defined as the activity of a given participant on a given occasion, which serves to influence in any way any of the other participants. Taking a particular participant and his performance as a basic point of reference, we may refer to those who contribute the other performances as the audience, observers, or co-participants. All of social action is a performance. I'm performing, you are performing, all the time. Let's look at the main points, and let's look at possible applications to translation. None of the main points he makes, among them are belief in the part one is playing. He uses the term front as the expressive equipment employed by an individual, the setting, and also the personal elements. He gives an example, I don't think I have enough time to read it, of the way in which the Chinese Mandarin had to preserve an element of aloofness and superiority to those inferior to him. A number of the studies he refers to look at the way in which aristocrats behaved or were supposed to behave. Dramatic realization. All of life is the drama, all of life is a play. As Sartre suggested, the attentive pupil who wishes to be attentive, his eyes riveted on the teacher, his ears wide open, so exhausts himself in playing the attentive role that he ends up by no longer hearing anything. I'm sure we all have students, or maybe some of you are students, who like to give the impression that you're listening to everything, but it's not always those students who are actually taking in. In fact, some of those are pretty dumb. Idealization. Our performance represents the idealized view of the situation. And I'll give some examples in one moment. The actor, the performer, has to maintain his or her control, as the actor does. We also, in our representation, idealization of some elements, misrepresent certain elements as we mystify, sublimate other elements. We contrive, we have to find a way around. We have a plan, a plot, in which we perhaps subvert reality. Actors work in a group, a team. In social life, we are seldom alone. We are working with a team of other people. Also in terms of the stage front region and backstage region. Sometimes the actor is at the front, sometimes taking a backstage role, not always being at the front. What I would like to do now, yes, is look at the way, can these elements be used in translation studies? I would say certainly to examine the way in which a translation is presented. And I shall now look at presentations of the recent translations of the novels of Clarice Lispector, published by New Directions and Penguin. Now I have to get out of here. No. Oh yes, the players we have in this particular performance are the novelist herself, Clarice Lispector, the author and biographer Benjamin Moser, the America's Society building, which is the setting on Park Avenue, not Park Place. New Directions Publishing Company. I couldn't find a picture of Giovanni Pontiero on the internet. Are any of you from Manchester here? Yeah, do you know Giovanni? Did you?
I know Juan.
Oh, you know Juan. Yeah. I just met him once, just before he died. And Elizabeth Bishop, who plays a minor role. Marvelous building. The American Society was funded by John D. Rockefeller in 1965 to bring along presidents and top politicians and authors to discuss problems associated with the Americas. Anybody ever been in? No? I think after reading this, I'll join. Try to get myself an invitation. Online registrations for tonight's program is closed. We'll look at the address, American Society, 648 Park Avenue. Online registration is closed. Members may arrive prior to the hour, pick up their tickets, non-members may pay at the door. Admission. This panel on fiction reading will celebrate the new translations of 5 of the great Brazilian writers' novels. Agua Viva, The Hour of the Star, The Passion According to G.H., Near to the Wild Heart and the Breath of Life. Benjamin Moser, series editor, New Directions. Clarice Lispector distinguished herself both as a fiction writer and a journalist. Her avant-garde modernist fiction has been extremely influential in Brazil as well as internationally. This event features translators Idra Novi and Johnny Lorenz, special guest renowned translation Gregory Rabassa, and Paulo Gurgel Valente, the author's son, in absentia. Barbara Epler, president and publisher of New Directions, will moderate. This will be held in English. A book signing will follow in collaboration with La Casa Azul bookstore. Brilliant and unclassifiable, glamorous, cultured, moody. Lispector is an emblematic 20th century artist who belongs in the same pantheon as Kafka and Joyce. With the additional collaboration of the Brazilian Endowment for the Arts, Columbia University, the Consulate General of Brazil in New York, the Hispanic New York Project, Hunter College, CUNY, Inter-Americas, the International Literary Quarterly, McNally Jackson Books, New York University, etc. I won't read all the blurb about the translators here. And let's go to the other one, and this should be easy to get. What's this? This is New Directions. Here, New Directions resurrects Clarice Lispector with new translations. Clarice Lispector was a beloved Brazilian novelist whose constantly surprising experimental prose was beloved by mid-century English language writers like Elizabeth Bishop, but little known to general readers in the US and UK, due to the fact that, according to Lispector biographer Benjamin Moser, the published English translations do not give a good representation of the qualities of her work. But that is likely to change due to a series of new translations of many of her books published simultaneously by New Directions in the US and Penguin Classics in the UK and edited by Moser. Moser's 2009 biography, Why This World, the biography of Clarice Lispector, was a kind of surprise hit, garnering lots of review attention and an NBCC award nomination. The interest for Moser's book proved that there was an English language readership for its subject. I knew there were little cells of people that were into her here and there, that I could help her enter the bloodstream, said Moser, who lives in Netherlands and also speaks Portuguese. That's good. The problem was the books were so badly translated. Most of them, not all of them, were almost unreadable in English. I got little attention for the, I got all this attention for her. I hope that someone like Barbara Epler, President and Editor-in-Chief of New Directions, would take it upon them to retranslate her, and that's what happened. New Directions has been steadily reissuing titles from its storied backlist over the past few years, commissioning new introductions from contemporary writers and hip new covers. It's a cover below you see here. When Moser heard that New Directions was preparing to reissue Lispector's last novel, The Hour of the Star, in its original English translation of Giovanni Pontiero with a new introduction by Colm Toibin, he contacted Epler and insisted they do a new translation. "You can't say no to that guy," said Epler. He's finally just put a bag over my head and clubbed me and said he'd do the translation himself in 2 or 3 weeks. Moser had resisted the idea of translating the Spectre himself, but finally decided to do it so as not to miss the chance to offer English readers a translation he felt worthy of the Spectre's legacy. According to Webster, the original translation also has its qualities. Ben's vision is very different. It's much more smooth than Pontiero. Moser insisted the Spectre is incredibly difficult to translate and to read at times, but she has this extremely distinctive voice. She's inimitable. A translation is at some degree an imitation. You have to find out how to do that, said Moser. The resulting book is filled with jagged, jerky, odd and utterly compelling prose, which is how it should be according to Moser. After the Hour of the Star, New Directions will issue 4 other Spectre titles next May. Near to the Wild Heart, Agua Viva, The Passion according to GH, The Breath of Life, The Last which had never appeared in English before. Where does this come from? This is Publishers Weekly website. Okay, let's move back to the slides and let's look what we can do with this. The setting. What I'm trying to do is something very basic, trying to use some of the points Goffman makes to try to form some kind of paradigm to analyze the performance that is taking place. The setting in the first slide I showed you is the American Society Council of the Americas, the premier forum dedicated to education, debate, and dialogue in the Americas, established by John D. Rockefeller and on Park Avenue. The Spectre has won the it's been nominated, the translation of Near the Wild Heart has been nominated for the National Book Critics Circle Award, and the translations were all carried about by a team of top US translators. And you can see the list of organizations, Brazilian Consulate, etc., supporting these talks. In the second Publishers Weekly slide, we could clearly see the idealization of the new translation, linked to a denigration, perhaps a misrepresentation, of the Pontiero translation. Pontiero is contrived, sorry, you can put this on the floor. Pontiero is contrived as the negative force who has misrepresented Lispector. The role of Benjamin Moser is mystified. He's seen as some kind of Superman. There is a very clear dramatic realization of the power of Moser forcing the New Directions to change their translation, saving Lispector from the bad translation. He's some kind of prophetical figure, ensuring that we read the real Clarice. It's almost a teleological mapping, moving towards enlightenment through the genius of Moser. The play or story is that we make the effort to read the new translation, which seems to be more difficult to read than the Pontiero translation, which is smooth, seen as negative here. We do the hard work and are rewarded by getting to know the real Lispector. Moser is the star of the team, the hero of the story, together with Clarice Lispector, the heroine, but they're also backed up by the backstage team of the editors, New Directions Publishing Company, and the other translators who remain in the background, and Elizabeth Bishop, who also makes comments there. Okay, so what I've tried to do then, I've tried to show that the concepts here of Goffman can be used to analyze at least the presentation of a translation. What I'd like to do now, I have two translations, or the first paragraphs of the two translations here. I can't remember which is which myself. I'd like you to, let's play again. Which is the Pontiero translation, the smooth, easy to read translation, which is now superseded. It was okay in the past, but now we have this marvelous translation of Moses. Who likes reading? Who's a good reader? I'm one of anybody? How many actors here? Yeah, okay, we have one.
Right.
Okay, text number 1.
Everything in the world began with a yes. One molecule said yes to another molecule, and life was born. But before prehistory, there was the prehistory of prehistory, and there was the never, and there was the yes. It was ever so. I do not know why, but I do know that the universe never began. Let no one be mistaken. I only achieve simplicity with enormous effort.
Okay, text number 1. Text number 2.
Anybody else? All the world began with a yes. One molecule said yes to another molecule and life was born. But before prehistory, there was the prehistory of prehistory. And there was the never and there was the yes. It was ever so. I don't know why, but I do know that the universe never began. Make no mistake. I only achieve simplicity with enormous effort.
Okay, what you have to do now is very simple. You just have to say, just give you another time where I've completed the 40 minutes of it.
Oh, it's this then.
Okay, text number 1, you have to, quick few seconds, is this Pontiero or Moser? And text number 2, is this Pontiero or Moser?
Text number 1, Pontiero. Can you go back again?
Okay, who thinks text number 1 is Pontiero? Yeah, we have a few people. Who thinks that text number 1 is Moser? More people? Just about the same. Who thinks that text number 2 is Pontiero? Some people are not quite sure. Who thinks that text number 2 is Moser? Yeah, some people are not sure. Anyway, let's do it again, alright? Who thinks that text number 1 is the old-fashioned, smooth translation of Pontiero, which has now been superseded by Moser's marvelous, jerky translation? Text number 1, Pontiero. Yeah. Text number 1, Moser. More or less even. Text number 2, Pontiero. Text number 2, Moser. It's more or less even. There was nothing was conclusive. Some people put their hands up twice or 3 times. All right. Let me see. I couldn't. Text number 1. All the world began with a yes. Which is this? No. All the world began with a yes. Text number 1. All the world began with a yes. One molecule said yes to another molecule, and life was born. Classic, the hour of the star, the penguin, new directions. Text number 1 is Moser. Text number 2. All the world began. No, everything in the world. So where are we? Sorry, what am I doing? Sorry, text number 1. I've gone. Sorry. Sorry, I'm mixing everything up. Sorry, begin again. Text number 1. Everything in the world began with a yes. One molecule said yes to another. The hour of the star, Carcanet Press, Pontier. Sorry. Text number 1, Pontier. Text number 2, therefore, all the world began with a yes, one molecule is the mole. Okay, but it was inconclusive. I don't know what the percentages were exactly.
It was very performative though, John, giving us 2 different...
but it was very inconclusive. I think what I tried to show is that I think, as I'm sure you could see, the importance is very much in the performance that Moser and those allied and Moser's team at New Directions, and it seems that the the Society of the Americas and Publishers Weekly make. Pontiero, until Moser came along, was regarded as a superb translator. No?
Not of Clarice, actually.
Of Saramago, yes, but
Saramago, not
not
Clarice.
so much of Clarice.
Okay. Okay. So we have a Moser fan.
No, not at all, not at all. I'm a
So he's
fan.
yeah.
But what went wrong then? I don't know, but there was a general acceptance that Giovanni's translations of Clarice were not nearly up to the mark of his translations of Saramago. I don't know his translations of Clarice well enough, but
Yeah.
but there was, but his translations of Saramago were superb.
Yeah. Well, going just on Saramago, of course, Saramago won the Nobel Prize, and if people say Saramago is difficult to read in Portuguese, I say read them in English, much easier to read, because no. I think because Giovanni Contiero put in a lot of full stops and.
No, that was the editors. Giovanni didn't.
No.
Sorry, I'm a Saramago specialist.
Oh, yeah, sorry, I didn't realise.
Giovanni didn't actually do that. The editors went
Really?
back over at some point and
Okay.
changed some of it.
Okay, thanks for telling me that.
Was he happy?
Okay, all right. Just to, I think what I've been trying to say, just summing up again, translation studies, adaptation studies and translation studies is an area those of us working in translation studies naturally work with when we study authors who've been involved in the cultural turn like Timoshu, like Hans Vermeer Scorpus, like on the Real Lefebvre and with refraction. I would say that adaptation studies is very linked to film studies and offers us relatively little. I think we can find relatively little from adaptation studies we can adapt to film, to translation studies as itself. However, I say there are possibilities in performance studies. And I've tried to sketch out a possible scheme to look at performance by using the elements of engulfment here. And I think we could see that in the two translations there was very much a very strong performance of the superiority of Moses' translation and Moses himself as a highly qualified, highly erudite, and I don't think erudite perhaps is the word, but a dynamic figure who can bring life back to Clarice. Perhaps if we look at performing translations themselves, we can look at something by the Brazilian brothers who are very well known, Haroldo and Augusto de Campos. One example we can give here, where they emulate the sound pattern of the original, in this case Arno Holtz's Baroque Marina, creating neologisms as they did with Finnegan's Wake, reflecting German morphology in the Portuguese language. The original we have, über die rollenden Wasserhähne lernen Jauch, Johlen, wollen jubeln, Lustlachen, schwärmen. Sombriagos rolantes eis bramantes, jubilo gritantes, alcreberantes, lubri gargalhantes. What do we find here? We find Haroldo and Augusto Germanizing Portuguese, compound adjectives which are not common in Portuguese or not possible in Portuguese. They are neologizing these words, trying to Germanize the language, making this kind of very obvious performance of